I'm Maria Garcia, Chair of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice. And I was born in Havana in 1957, and I left in 1962 in July with my mother and father and my elder sister and a cousin. They were 15, 12, and I was 6. And we left because my father was opposed to communist rule. He was worried that his girls would end up in the military, which was a rumor, which has turned out to be not such a rumor depending on who you speak to. And they were convinced that it would be a short-term voyage here. So we came in '62, and we didn't go back I went back just recently after 50 years. I went back because Arcadia has opened up this opportunity for me to go back. I had several opportunities at other institutions to go back over the years, but I was always afraid that my parents would be hurt by it. They were afraid that if we went back, something would happen to us because my dad had a record, because we had left as anti-communists, and so they were frightened for our safety, and so I didn't want to go back. My father has died in the interim, and my mother had dementia, and it really freed me up to think about going. And so when Arcadia came up with this opportunity to do a preview and begin a relationship with the University of Havana, I was ecstatic. So it is through this university that I've been able to go back. I led a Cuba Preview this year, which actually I don't know how much fun we're going to have with the faculty given the students, because they were hilarious. And they were wonderful to be with. So we took a week to Cuba, and we had 18 first-year students, many of them who had absolutely no idea about Cuba. A couple of them had had a parent or a grandparent who had been Cuban, and so one of them had a father from Guanabacoa, which is a little bit outside of the city. This young student was able to go back and see the history of her father. So we took 18 students. Meredith Mashner went with me, who is one of the folks from the Office of International Affairs. My family went with me, and we studied here for 5 weeks before we went, and what we tried to do was get a sense of Cuba from multiple perspectives. And so we studied some of Castro's work, which is quite lengthy. We studied some sociologists' positions on Cuba and some of the work that they had been doing over time. So we took a look at another perspective on Cuba. We did a little bit of reading of Jose Marti's work. Marti is considered the liberator of Cuba in the 1800s, and so we tried to do multiple readings. We read a little bit about the different exiled communities here from Cuba, the more kind of conservative communities, the more liberal communities that are here, and how they think about relations with Cuba. So we tried to get a sense of Cuba from multiple spaces. And then we went and kept a journal and a picture record of what was the things that we saw and whose perspective they fit, right? And so what we did in Cuba was to try to get a sense of all of the complexities of what it means to be a Cuban, and particularly the misnaming of information that we'd received in this country. So trying to get a sense of the real or the true. And what's happened is that I find that Cuba is one of those places that is ideal for study because there's so many truths that are all operating at the same time. Now, as students and teachers, you know this is true, right? There's always many kinds of truth. But Cuba allows us to see this both in documented form, in the writings, in different ways. I think it offers us an opportunity to test knowledge in terms of the real. So that's been really interesting, and the students were really amazed at that. Students learned about American class structures, which I thought was really amazing. So we go to Cuba, and the students say to me, day 3, wow, this is what, in the US, some people have a lot of money and this is how they act. In the US, this is the difference between people who have privilege and entitlement and people who don't. That here, they didn't see it, right? Because they were inside whatever class system they're in, and so everything seems normal. When you step out and you watch not just yourselves perform, but other people perform class, you begin to notice things that you don't see here. So many of them came back thinking about American privilege, American class structures. many of them came back and learned and thought about and have continued to write to me about what they learned about American power. So the other variable that was really important, or the other piece of learning, was that students, I think, come from many families where we don't deconstruct what the government does, right? We assume that they're doing X, Y, or Z. So the students who went to Cuba, I think, are better able to say, what's this policy about toward Cuba or another country, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tanzania, Cape, whatever, and what does it mean about who gets included and who doesn't? So they can do, I think, a kind of power dynamic analysis of the U.S. in a way that they couldn't do before Cuba. And so that, I think, is really, really important, right? And it connects to this whole global connections piece in the Arcadia curriculum, which is you go abroad in order to gain lenses to which to come back and look at our own and back and forth it, right? So you go to come back to look, to go back and reassess. So it's an ongoing process. So I think for the Cuba kids, that was important. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sure they learned a lot more than this, but I think the other thing that they did was they learned how to teach each other. It was really phenomenal in the trip to watch them research something for the other person's interest and to share it all through Cuba, right? So, you know, if I was with Abbey, a student might say, well, you really love to paint. Look, look, look. So they took responsibility for making the trip work. I think that is a unique preview experience. I've been to Cuba 3 times this year on behalf of the university. And the first time I went was in January, and I expected to be a kind of emotional mess, right? I expected to be teary and emotional. And in fact, what happened is that I was very, very calm and very numb. So I don't think I processed any of the feelings. I just looked and wrote and looked and wrote. I think it was too much to process because it had been too many years. And Cubans always expected to go back. So every year my family would say next year in Cuba, right? So I waited 50 years and I go back. The second time I went with the students, and that allowed me to be much more emotional because I could allow that affect out with them there. And it was very shocking because I started to realize that what I imagined may not be what actually happened, and that I had a set of memories that had been told to me that I had shaped given the ages that I was. And now when I was in Cuba, I was wondering how real they were. Who gave me those memories? Why were those memories given to me? And so I started to think about this kind of imagined self and imagined home, which is a research piece that I'm working on now. I think the best story from last time I was in Cuba is that I went to my old house. I was born in this house in Cuba, and I lived there, and I was actually born in my mother's bed, and they raised me up to the window to show the neighborhood. I know it's silly, right? And so I found the room, I found the house myself, and it was still pink, and I knew where it was. And I got out, and next to me, this door opens, and this man comes out, who must be 60, I guess, comes running across the street while my partner and my son and I are sitting there, and I'm crying, and he says, "Ana Maria, it's you," which it'd been 50 years. I had left as a child. And across the street, the door opens, and this other family comes out and says, "Don't you remember me? I'm the grocer's wife. It's Ana Maria. How's your mother? How's your father?" It was so remarkable to me that after 50 years, people still had that event of the Exodus and that experience of the exile and that experience of separation had been really like a frozen element for them, right? That they were living in the present, but also living in the past, right? And so I don't quite know what to do with that, right? But they're living in multiple spaces in Cuba, and that was very, very moving for me. So I'm going back this time and taking some time to interview them about what that night was like when we left, so that I can add that to the memories and the wording that I carry from my family and try to figure out some of the other elements of that story. We're going back again, June 24th, for a week, and this is a faculty development seminar that has been created by Arcadia. Arcadia faculty are going. There's 10 of us, 8 of us, 12 of us. Were you counting, Abby? 12 of us. And Abbey Ryan is one of them, and I'll let her talk in a minute. She's one of our stars. Abby was a student of mine, and now she's a terrific painter and a faculty member. So there's 12 of us going from Arcadia, and faculty from 7 other universities in the area. And we've been working together to create both a kind of a 2-part itinerary. So in the morning, the faculty from all these universities are going to meet with the University of Havana faculty in different areas in order to do some real peer-to-peer conversation about the possibilities of collaborative research. So for instance, I'm interested in gender and race and this idea of home and self-development. And so I want to talk to the gender people, I want to talk to the race people, and see what work they're doing around identity, how that might fit with my work, how we might help each other work. We have some folks going with us that are artists. A number of them are artists, and so they're going to work with folks at the University of Havana, as well as some artists that are working there now to look at ways that they might collaborate together. So at one level, it's a kind of intellectual exchange. It's a faculty ideas exchange between what is really 9 universities, right? So it's quite wonderful. We're going to use the afternoons as field visits, right? So part of the day will be sitting around, talking together, exchanging ideas, exchanging resources, conceptualizing perhaps a monograph that we might publish in the future around our experiences. The afternoon is going to be time for us to explore both cultural areas like the Museum of the Revolution and the Museum of Art, the botanical gardens, but also give the faculty a chance to investigate those parts of Cuba that are important for them in their research work. So we're going to go see the Yoruba Cultural Museum, which for a number of the faculty is quite important in terms of thinking about Afro-Cuban identity. Tell me a little bit about why you want to go to Cuba.
Sure. Well, my name's Abbey Ryan again. I'm a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Art and Design. I've been at Arcadia for 5 years, and this is going to be my second location that I've traveled to. I've gone with art students to Italy before with a visual artist in Italy class, and I'm really excited about this trip because I have a pretty significant interest in collaborating with other faculty and travel, and I guess maybe I should talk about my own research. I do a lot of things as an artist and I guess as an illustrator, but probably the most predominant research that I've been working on for the last 5 years is a project called A Painting a Day, and I've been doing that since September 23rd, 2007, and I think there maybe are 700, 800 paintings or something, I'm not sure.
Amazing.
But the Painting a Day project is kind of complex, or complex I guess would be a good word, because it serves a significant purpose in my own artistic research, and as well as serving kind of a larger purpose kind of globally. So I post a painting that I've done in my studio in Philadelphia. I have a little paint box. It's actually kind of ironically a cigar box.
See?
Cigar box easel that I made. And then I posted on a blog, which basically kind of makes it available to people all over the world, and literally all over the world. People look at my work, and my work is in collections, you know, in all over Europe and China, Japan, South Africa, Australia, South America. And so by doing this project, I work in my studio daily, but I also have often daily access with people all over the world. Daily communication. And so when I heard about this Cuba trip, I had lots of things kind of came forward for me. One was this idea of working with other faculty, and you know, I have a pretty significant admiration for this university because I'm an alum, and so that was part of it. And then with regard to my own research, you know, because I work with this small paint box, whenever I travel, I bring my paints with me. And so, you know, when I've gone to Italy, like I said, I've also been to South America, to Chile. I have some family there. and I bring my box with me and I paint there. And in a way, that experience of painting abroad is a significant way that I connect with that place. And it's sort of like every painting I've done abroad, I can imagine them going through my mental Rolodex. Every painting I've done abroad takes me back to that immediate moment of doing it. And you can write about things, and there are a lot of ways of connecting with a place, I think. But for me, that's pretty amazing, because it not only creates like this piece of artwork, but it also engages me in a way that's very different than just looking or taking a picture or writing. And at the same time, when I post these paintings on my blog, it creates an experience of sorts for all the people who look at it. And, you know, these are thousands, tens of thousands of people. And I think that's really an amazing part of this project, where, you know, it's about art and about works of art, but it's also about the world and connecting with people and making it smaller and more connected. And so it's really been a gift in that way, because, you know, I announced that I'm going to Cuba on my blog, and I get lots of emails from people who either have stories about Cuba, or who have been to Cuba, or who have family who left Cuba, and it's really kind of fascinating. And on another side of it, when I'm in that place of painting somewhere, so Cuba as an example, I find that when I'm working in that space, you know, let's say painting a landscape somewhere, it somehow is kind of an inviting phenomena for people, because I'm engaged, kind of focused in something, and, you know, I hope I have kind of a welcoming energy about me, and people often just come up and look, you know, and, you know, even when there's language differences, there's still a pretty amazing, significant connection that gets made because of that. This past time we were in Italy with the visual artist in Italy class, I found this sort of breakfast nook with a window that I decided to paint in when I wasn't painting outside, kind of at the hotel where we were staying. And I wasn't supposed to be there, and at first they were kind of alarmed, like I was expecting something by being there or something, but ultimately, you know, I kind of slowly just kind of sat there and read and made my presence kind of almost invisible, I guess. And then a couple of days later, eventually the owner came down and he started talking to me, and couldn't really connect, but I think I gathered that someone in his family was an artist, and that he was really proud of the fact that I was making paintings there, and it was this really interesting connection that wouldn't have happened otherwise. You know, I was, you know, kind of a no-name person to him otherwise. You know, it's not as though we will keep in touch or anything, but it kind of creates this deeper connection for me, and also to some degree for the other. The amazing thing about Arcadia is that it is probably maybe the most, if not one of the most inclusive places I've ever worked or been a part of, and it's never really an issue, you know, as long as you put your heart into things and are present and focused and available. I find that with regard to faculty and, you know, being an alum and now a faculty, it's the most welcoming, and I don't know, just there's just a real sense of everyone is valid, and everyone is important. And so, you know, for me, going with Scott and Anna to Cuba is really kind of, I don't know, hard to believe, I guess. But from the perspective of interacting with them and working with them and collaborating with them, hopefully, it really just is easy, you know. Scott Rollins, even when you're a student of Scott Rollins, he kind of always treats all of his students as semi-professional or professional, and, you know, he takes students with him on professional workshops or conferences, and collaborates with students, and helps them with internships. And so it's very much like, you know, kind of a professional level relationship always anyway. And it's just pure love, so, you know, nothing really can be bad with that. I had an interesting conversation with a class that I teach, advanced drawing, where they kind of work on maybe half a semester project and then mount an exhibition. And the learning process of going through making an independent project is one thing, but then also translating that into what you might show publicly is pretty huge. And so it brings up a lot of conversations, a lot of like angst and, you know, good things that they go through, so that they can not have to go through them after they graduate or when they get to thesis maybe. And somehow we came to talking while they were working on this project and this installation about expectations of the art world, expectations of the viewer, of their audience. And they started kind of saying a lot of things that were tapping into like biases or prejudices or just kind of stereotypes, I guess. And somehow or other, I can't quite remember, but somehow or other we got to talking about international art, or somebody brought up something about art on a global scale. And one thing that the conversation led to, from my perspective, which we began to talk about, was how amazing it would be if, when we are presented with works of art, we actually could learn or use it as a learning device about different cultures. So for example, the one that I used, I might have heard somewhere, I forget where I came up with it, but the one that I used was, imagine if instead of through the media, people learned about Afghanistan, for example, since you brought it up. Imagine if people learned about it not through the media, but through looking at works of art by Afghanistan artists. And, you know, I've never seen work or tried, I mean, never been presented with it. But instead of it being like a filter through someone else's lens or someone else's questions, you know, I know when there's interviews, it's always edited and you never know what they're gonna spin. But to see works of art by the people from that place. And, you know, it was a really fruitful discussion with the students. And so with this trip, I hope, and I'm gonna be looking for this anyway, that it will, you know, I wasn't speaking firsthand really about that example, so just having firsthand experience of, you know, having these sort of blank slate preconceptions of Cuba, and then having the experience of maybe meeting artists, talking with art faculty, other faculty, and really in a kind of sensitive way filtering what I'm seeing through the lens of what everything else is happening around me, and using that as a way of understanding the place. And, you know, I'm working with another colleague, June Lee, on a course, an ID course, visual awareness, in somewhere, I'm hoping Iceland, but could be anywhere. And I think that is also connected, where it's maybe an obvious thing to think about art as a way of connecting with a culture, but not just connecting with it, but also using it as a direct point of learning about that place. And as a way of almost rejecting what else is presented through the media.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I think for me what was really essential learning when I went to the preview, and in thinking about this trip, is this idea of standpoint perspective. That, like, I know that in education we talk a lot about how people have a point of view, a perspective that they speak from, and that there are many truths operating at the same time, and that's a kind of a popular idea in education, right? But I don't think we actually believe that. I think that we actually believe that our experience is right, that what we've learned is right, and that once we've learned something, it's the end, right? There's a kind of unidimensionality to that language that we use about what we know. And what struck me about Cuba was that there's an ambiguity to truth that I think would be very instrumental for Americans to learn, right? That truth is shaded and it changes and it's organic. What a painter might do on a Tuesday may look very different from another day of the week, right? That each of us are always shaping and representing truth. And that really the scholarship of the classroom is about learning how one assesses all of those truths without deciding that you know enough. Do you know what I mean? That I think for me, it's how do I bring back to the class that amazing sense I had of, oh my God, there's so many slices here, right? There's so many layers of truth and of experience lived and written and read. And also the other idea of oral traditions, that so much of what is known about Cuba is a kind of story told by an agendized perspective, right? That the Kennedy administration had a perspective that we kind of bought, right? The Cold War ideas that we bought, so much of what we know is based not on our own searching and understanding complexity, but this idea that there's a right and a wrong. And I think Cuba is one of those environments that teaches us that binaries don't make any sense, right? Because even race in Cuba is, if you look at their national statistics, they have 66% mulatto, 7% black, and then white, and then 1% Asian, Chinese. But if you look at another document, it doesn't include mulatto. In fact, it breaks you down into black and white, right? So even this way that they report themselves, right, is very much ambiguous and moving and shifting. And so that's what I want to bring back, right? This kind of working in time, that we don't really know a place, and we have to actually be willing to see it in multiple, right, in multiple. So something like that.
When you were talking, I was kind of taken back to the moment I remember when I first heard or learned that gender is a continuum, right? And tied with that also, and with students, I guess I would say, is the idea that kind of the idea of just having a real, genuine curiosity about something is kind of all you need.
That's right.
To have an experience that's
to suspend the thing that you know, right?
Right, yeah. And that I think is important to all students, but particularly with art, I think, in this locale, there's a kind of an enormous focus on art that's in the city and art that's revolved around New York, and having a kind of high art idea connected with that. And, you know, there's a film, I shouldn't bring this up, but there's a film called Who Does She Think She Is? And everyone was really excited about the film. I guess women mostly, but I hope everyone. But, and I didn't see it until years later, but I heard that people were disappointed because the artists that they highlighted, the women artists that they highlighted, were not like kind of big name artists. They were, some artists were from the Midwest, some were from the West, you know, making kind of artwork that looks like, you know, Arizona or New Mexico or something. And so it's kind of like, oh, you know, is it representative of good enough artists, or are they successful enough or something? And I could see that, you know, and I can see that having that standard and understanding that, you know, art historically and contextually. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, why would we judge that? Really? I mean, I know why monetarily, but really, why would we judge that? And if you can have a real state of curiosity about what that person is doing or what they're doing anywhere, then that can be a life skill that really can be transformative.